The wagon lurched to a stop, and Daisy Callahan felt her stomach drop with it. She'd been riding for 2 days through country that got meaner the higher they climbed. First the scrub plains, then the pine forests, and finally this, mountains that looked like they'd been carved by something angry. The kind of peaks that didn't just block the sky, they owned it. Everything up here was sharp, the rocks, the wind, the way the sun cut through the thin air like broken glass. The driver, a wiry man named Colfax who'd barely spoken 10 words since she'd paid him in Silver Falls, set the brake and spat over the side. "This is it," he said. Daisy stared at the collection of weathered buildings scattered across a plateau that looked like it had been slapped onto the mountainside by accident. Ranch was a generous word. It was more like a challenge thrown down against the wilderness. A barn, a bunkhouse, a main house with a stone chimney bleeding smoke, and a few sheds that looked one strong wind away from kindling. "You sure?" she asked. "Granger Ranch. You wanted remote, lady. You got it." Colfax was already climbing down, moving toward her trunk in the back. 15 miles to the nearest town. No roads once the snow comes. Just trails and prayers. Daisy stepped down from the wagon, and the cold hit her like a fist. It was only September, but up here autumn meant something different. The air bit at her cheeks and found every gap in her coat. Her breath came out in clouds, and she could feel the altitude sitting on her chest like a weight. She was a big woman, always had been, always would be, and she'd learned to carry herself like she didn't care who noticed. Broad shoulders, thick arms, a body that her mother once said was built for work, not for wanting. Daisy had stopped arguing with that assessment years ago. She wore her size like armor now, because if you acted like you didn't hurt, sometimes people believed you. Her dark hair was pulled back tight under a faded bonnet, and her dress, the best she owned, was already dusty from the road. She brushed at it once, then stopped. It didn't matter. Nothing about her was going to impress anyone today. The ranch house door opened, and 3 men stepped out. The first was older, 60s maybe, with a beard more gray than brown and eyes that had seen too much weather. He wore a leather vest over a flannel shirt and walked with a limp that spoke of old brakes that never set right. The second was younger, mid-20s, tall and lean, with the cocky slouch of someone who thought being pretty made you important. He looked Daisy up and down like she was livestock, then smirked at the older man. "That's the cook?" he said, not bothering to lower his voice. The older man ignored him. "Miss Callahan?" "Yes, sir." "Tom Beckett, foreman." He nodded toward the younger man. "That's Riley. He's got more mouth than sense, but he can wrangle cattle when he's sober." Riley's smirk widened, but Beckett had already turned toward the third man who'd been standing in the doorway the whole time. "And that's Wade Granger. He owns the place." Daisy looked up and up, because Wade Granger was the kind of tall that made you reconsider your understanding of human proportions. 6'4", maybe more, with shoulders that could have been carved from the same granite as the mountains behind him. He wore a sheepskin coat over dark wool, boots that had seen 1,000 miles, and a hat that shadowed most of his face. But she could see his eyes. Pale gray, like ice over deep water. Cold and measuring. He stepped off the porch and walked toward her with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who'd never rushed for anything in his life. When he stopped, he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "You know how to cook?" he asked. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. "Yes, sir." "You know what kind of work this is? Cooking for your men, 3 meals a day, baking, preserves if there's time. In a kitchen that's older than you, with a stove that's mean, at altitude that'll steal your breath, with winters that'll bury this place so deep you won't see the valley for months." He paused. "And you'll be doing it alone. No help, no excuses." Daisy felt her jaw tighten. "I didn't come here for easy, Mr. Granger." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite amusement, not quite approval. "What'd you come here for?" The truth sat in her throat like a stone. "Because I had nowhere else to go. Because the last place I worked, they fired me for looking at the owner's son wrong. Because every town I've been through in the last year has looked at me and decided I'm not worth the trouble." But she didn't say any of that. "I came here to work," she said instead. Wade studied her for a long moment. Behind him, Riley muttered something to Beckett that made the older man's jaw tighten. "You'll get 1 week," Wade said finally. "Trial period. You keep the men fed, you keep the kitchen clean, you show me you can handle the work, you stay. You can't. You leave when the supply wagon comes back through. No hard feelings." 1 week? Daisy nodded once. "Fair enough? Beckett will show you the kitchen. Riley," Wade turned and the younger man's smirk vanished like smoke. "Go help Colfax with her trunk, and keep your damn mouth shut while you do it." Riley's face went red, but he moved. Wade looked at Daisy one more time, then walked back toward the house without another word. The door shut behind him with a sound like finality. Beckett let out a breath. "Don't mind him. He's not much for talking. I noticed. Come on, I'll show you where you'll be working." The kitchen was attached to the main house by a covered breezeway, a low building made of logs and stone that smelled like old grease, wood smoke, and something vaguely metallic. Beckett pushed open the door, and Daisy stepped inside. It was bigger than she'd expected, and worse. The stove dominated one wall, a massive cast-iron beast with 6 burners and an oven that looked like it could swallow a whole pig. The surface was scarred and stained, the grates rusted in places, and when Daisy touched the handle, it left black residue on her palm. "She's temperamental," Beckett said. "Burns hot on the left, barely gets warm on the right. You'll figure her out." Daisy looked around. There was a long wooden table in the center, scarred by years of knife work. Shelves lined the walls, half of them sagging under the weight of mismatched pots, pans, and Dutch ovens. A dry sink sat beneath a window that overlooked the yard, and a hand pump stood next to it. "Water comes from a spring upslope," Beckett explained. "Pump works most of the time. When it doesn't, there's a rain barrel out back." "Most of the time?" "Gets cranky when it's cold." He gestured toward a door at the back of the kitchen. "That's your room. Small, but it's private. You'll have a bed, a stove for heat, and a chest for your things." Daisy walked to the door and pushed it open. Small was generous. The room was barely 8 feet across, with a narrow bed shoved against one wall and a potbelly stove in the corner. A single window looked out at the mountains and the wind whistled through gaps in the frame. But it was hers. She turned back to Beckett. "When do the men eat?" "Breakfast at 5:30, dinner at noon, supper at 6. He pulled a folded paper from his vest and handed it to her. "Supply list? Flour, beans, cornmeal, salt pork, lard, basics. We get a wagon up once a month, weather permitting. You'll need to make it stretch." Daisy unfolded the paper and scanned it. It was sparse. No butter, no eggs, unless the chickens laid. No sugar except what was already in the pantry. "How many men am I feeding?" 8, including Wade, sometimes 9 if we've got a hand passing through." "Every day?" "Every day they're here. During roundup and branding, you might be cooking for 12, 15, but that's spring and fall. Right now it's just the regulars." Daisy nodded slowly. 8 men, 3 meals a day, a stove that didn't work right, and supplies that had to last a month. She'd done worse. "I'll manage," she said. Beckett looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened. "I hope you do, Miss Callahan. We've been without a cook for 2 months. Men are getting tired of their own cooking." "What happened to the last one?" "Quit after 3 weeks, said the isolation made him crazy." "Him?" "Yeah. Wade's tried women before, but they don't usually last either. Too far from civilization, too much work, too little company." He paused. "You married?" "No, sir." "Got family expecting you back somewhere?" "No, sir." Beckett nodded, but she could see the question he wasn't asking. "Then what are you running from?" She didn't answer it. "I'll let you settle in," Beckett said. "Supper's in 3 hours. Beans and cornbread'll do for tonight. Keep it simple." He left, and Daisy stood alone in the kitchen. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the wind rattling the windows and the creak of the building settling. She walked to the stove and opened the oven door. Inside was a layer of ash and grease thick enough to scrape. She rolled up her sleeves. By the time the men started gathering for supper, Daisy's hands were raw, her back ached, and she smelled like lye soap and old smoke. But the kitchen was cleaner than it had been in months. The stove was lit, and a pot of beans simmered on the back burner. She'd found cornmeal in the pantry, along with some baking powder that was only half expired, and managed to throw together a batch of cornbread that didn't look like a complete disaster. It wasn't pretty, but it'd fill bellies. The door opened and the men filed in. There were 8 of them, just like Beckett had said. They ranged from early 20s to late 50s, all of them weathered by sun and work. They smelled like horses, sweat, and leather, and they tracked mud across the floor Daisy had just scrubbed. She gritted her teeth and said nothing. They took their seats at the long table, and Daisy started serving, beans ladled into chipped bowls, cornbread stacked on a tin plate in the center. She moved quietly, efficiently, keeping her eyes down. Riley watched her the whole time, that same smirk playing at his mouth. "Smells better than what Hank was making." One of the older hands, a grizzled man with a scar across his nose, grunted. "Hank couldn't cook worth a damn. If she can boil water without burning it, she's already an improvement." A few of the men chuckled. Daisy set the last bowl down and stepped back. "Coffee's on the stove if you want it." "Yes, ma'am," one of them said, standing to pour himself a cup. Wade was the last to arrive. He came in without a word, took his seat at the head of the table, and waited. Daisy filled his bowl and set it in front of him. Their eyes met for just a second, his unreadable, hers steady, and then she stepped away. The men ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the scrape of spoons and the crackle of the fire. Finally, Beckett spoke. "Not bad, Miss Callahan." "It's just beans," she said. "Yeah, but they're not burned. That's a win." A few of the men laughed, and Daisy felt something tight in her chest ease just a fraction. Wade didn't say anything. He ate methodically, finished his bowl, and stood. "Long day tomorrow," he said. "Turn in early." The men nodded and started clearing their plates. Daisy watched Wade leave, the door swinging shut behind him, and wondered if he'd say anything about the food. He didn't. That night, lying in the narrow bed in her tiny room, Daisy stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind. Her body hurt. Her hands were blistered from scrubbing, her shoulders tight from lifting heavy pots, and her feet throbbed from standing all day. The altitude made her head feel thick, and every breath seemed like it took more effort than it should. But she'd made it through the first day. 1 down, 6 to go. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't settle. She kept thinking about Wade's cold gray eyes, the way the men had looked at her like she was already a failure, the weight of proving herself pressing down like the mountains outside. "You've been here before," she told herself. "You've started over before. You'll do it again." But starting over got harder every time. The next morning, Daisy woke before dawn to the sound of boots on the breezeway. She forced herself out of bed, lit the potbelly stove, and splashed freezing water on her face from the basin she'd filled the night before. By the time she got to the kitchen, the sky was still dark, and the cold was sharp enough to make her eyes water. She built up the fire in the stove, set a pot of coffee to boil, and started mixing biscuit dough. Her hands were clumsy in the cold, and the dough fought her, sticking to her fingers and the table. "Come on," she muttered. "Work with me." The door banged open, and Beckett walked in, stomping snow off his boots. "Morning." "Morning, Daisy said, not looking up. "Coffee's almost ready." "Thank Christ." He poured himself a cup and leaned against the counter, watching her work. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough." "Cold." "I'll manage." Beckett nodded. "Gets worse. By December, you'll wake up with frost on the inside of your windows." Daisy didn't answer. She rolled out the biscuit dough, cut it into rough circles, and laid them on a baking sheet. "You ever worked a ranch before?" Beckett asked. "No." "Ever lived in the mountains?" "No." "Ever cooked for more than a family?" "No." Beckett took a sip of his coffee. "Then what the hell made you think you could do this?" Daisy looked up, meeting his eyes. "Because I didn't have a choice." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fair enough." The other men started trickling in, and Daisy served breakfast, biscuits, fried salt pork, and thick gravy made from the drippings. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling, and the men ate without complaint. Wade came in last again, his face shadowed under his hat. He took his plate, ate in silence, and left without a word. Daisy watched him go and wondered what it would take to earn something more than silence from him. The days blurred together. Daisy woke before dawn, cooked breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, started dinner. The work was relentless, hauling water, chopping wood for the stove, scrubbing pots until her knuckles bled. The altitude made everything harder. She'd climb the stairs to the pantry and have to stop halfway, gasping, her heart pounding in her ears. The stove fought her constantly. The left side burned everything. The right side barely got warm. She learned to rotate pans, to check the oven every 5 minutes, to trust her instincts more than the damned unreliable heat. The men watched her. Some of them were kind. Beckett, who always thanked her for the food. An older hand named Caleb, who helped her carry firewood without being asked. A quiet man named Esteban, who nodded at her every morning like she was worth acknowledging. Others were less kind. Riley never missed a chance to needle her. "Biscuits are a little heavy today, aren't they?" "Coffee's weak. My ma used to make better gravy than this." Daisy ignored him. She'd dealt with men like Riley her whole life, men who needed someone to look down on to feel big. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction, but it wore on her. By the 4th day, her hands were a mess of cuts and burns. By the 5th, she was so tired she could barely stand. By the 6th, she was starting to wonder if she'd make it to 7. And then everything changed. It was late afternoon, and Daisy was in the kitchen peeling potatoes when she heard shouting from the yard. She dropped the knife and ran to the window. A group of men were carrying someone toward the house. A young cowboy named Jacob, maybe 20, his face twisted in pain. His right arm hung at a wrong angle, and even from the kitchen, Daisy could see the bone pressing against the skin. "Get him inside," Beckett was yelling. "Careful! Don't jostle him!" They carried Jacob into the bunkhouse, and Daisy stood frozen for a moment, her heart racing. Then she grabbed a clean towel, filled a basin with water, and followed. The bunkhouse was chaos. Jacob was on a bunk, sweating and groaning, his broken arm cradled against his chest. The men crowded around him, talking over each other. "We need to get him to a doctor. Nearest dock is 15 miles, and the trail's washed out. We can't just leave it like this." "Move," Daisy said. The men turned, surprised. "Move," she said again, louder. Beckett stepped aside, and Daisy pushed through to the bunk. She set down the basin and looked at Jacob's arm. It was a clean break, just above the wrist. Bad, but not the worst she'd seen. "You ever set a bone before?" Beckett asked quietly. "Once," Daisy said. "My brother. He fell out of a barn when he was 12. "Did it work?" "He still has the arm." Jacob let out a whimper, and Daisy looked down at him. "This is going to hurt," she said. "But if we don't set it now, it'll heal wrong, and you'll lose use of it. Understand?" Jacob nodded, tears streaming down his face. Daisy turned to Beckett. "I need 2 men to hold him, and I need whiskey." Someone handed her a flask, and she gave it to Jacob. "Drink." He drank, coughing, and she waited until his eyes started to glaze before she nodded to the men holding him. "On 3, she said. 1. She didn't wait for 3. She gripped Jacob's wrist and forearm and pulled, sharp and clean, and the bone slid back into place with a sound that made half the men in the room flinch. Jacob screamed, then passed out. Daisy wrapped the arm quickly, splinting it with 2 flat pieces of wood she'd grabbed from the kindling pile, and tied it off with strips of cloth. When she was done, she sat back, her hands shaking. The bunkhouse was silent. Beckett stared at her. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" "I told you, my brother." "That was 30 years ago. Some things you don't forget." She stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked out before anyone could say anything else. That night, Wade came to the kitchen. Daisy was washing dishes when the door opened, and she looked up to see him standing in the doorway, hat in his hands. "Jacob's resting," he said. "Arms set clean. Beckett says you saved him a lot of pain." "I did what needed doing." Wade nodded slowly. He stepped inside, and the room felt smaller with him in it. "You've been here 6 days." "I know. You've kept the men fed, kept the kitchen clean, handled things I didn't expect you to handle." Daisy waited. You've got the job, Wade said. If you want it. Something loosened in her chest, but she kept her face neutral. I want it. Good. He turned to leave, then paused. You did good today, Daisy. It was the first time he'd used her name. She watched him go, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she let herself believe she might actually survive this place. The weeks that followed Jacob's injury settled into something that almost felt like routine, though Daisy was learning that nothing on this mountain stayed predictable for long. October came in hard, bringing frost that turned the grass silver by morning and winds that screamed down from the peaks like something alive and angry. The aspens on the lower slopes blazed gold for about a week, then gave up and dropped their leaves all at once, leaving the mountainside looking skeletal and exposed. Daisy's body was changing too, though not in ways she'd expected. She'd thought the hard work might slim her down. That's what happened in the dime novels, wasn't it? The soft city girl goes west and transforms into something delicate and lovely. But real life didn't work like fiction. She was still big, still broad-shouldered and thick-waisted, but now there was muscle underneath. Her arms had grown strong from kneading bread and hauling water. Her legs no longer shook when she climbed the stairs to the root cellar. Her hands, once soft despite years of kitchen work in town, had developed calluses that made holding a knife easier and burns less frequent. The altitude bothered her less now. She could make it through a full day without stopping to catch her breath, could carry a Dutch oven full of stew from the kitchen to the bunkhouse without feeling like her heart might explode. She'd earned her place here, and the men knew it. Most of them, anyway. Riley still couldn't help himself. He'd make comments about the food being too salty or not salty enough, complain that the coffee was strong enough to kill a horse, suggest that maybe a real cook would know how to make something other than beans and cornbread. Daisy had learned to tune him out like background noise, like the wind or the creaking of the building. But every now and then, his words would catch her at the wrong moment, when she was tired or frustrated or missing something she couldn't quite name, and they'd burrow under her skin like splinters. It was a Tuesday morning, cold enough that the water in the pump had frozen overnight, when Riley finally pushed too far. Daisy had been up since 4 trying to coax the stove into cooperation. The damn thing had decided to smoke instead of draw, and the kitchen was hazy with it. Her eyes burned, her throat was raw, and she'd already burned 1 pan of biscuits trying to get the temperature right. The men came in for breakfast looking half frozen, their faces red from the wind. Daisy served what she had: oatmeal with a little brown sugar, the last of the bacon from the smokehouse, and biscuits that were darker than she'd wanted but still edible. Riley took 1 bite of his biscuit and made a face like he'd swallowed poison. Christ, Daisy, these taste like charcoal. She was at the stove pouring coffee, and her hand tightened on the pot. Then don't eat them. I'm just saying my grandmother could make better biscuits than this, and she's been dead for 10 years. A few of the men shifted uncomfortably. Caleb, the older hand who'd always been kind to Daisy, cleared his throat. Riley, shut your damn mouth. What? I'm just being honest. If she can't take criticism, maybe she shouldn't be cooking. Daisy set the coffee pot down carefully, turned and looked at him. Really looked at him. Riley was leaning back in his chair with that same smirk he always wore, like everything was a joke, and he was the only one smart enough to get it. You know what, Riley? She said, her voice level and cold. You're right, these biscuits aren't perfect. The stove's been smoking all morning, the temperature's off, and I've been awake since 4 trying to make sure you ungrateful bastards have something hot to eat before you go out in that cold. So no, they're not as light and fluffy as your dead grandmother's. But they're here, they're edible, and if you don't like them, you can get up at 4 tomorrow and make your own damn breakfast. The kitchen went silent. Riley's smirk faltered. I was just joking. No, you weren't. You were being a mean little shit because it makes you feel big. Daisy crossed her arms. And I'm tired of it. You want to criticize my cooking? Fine. But you better be ready to do better yourself. Riley's face went red. He opened his mouth, then closed it, then shoved back from the table and stalked out, slamming the door behind him. The remaining men sat frozen, staring at their plates. Finally, Beckett let out a low whistle. Well, that was overdue. Esteban nodded, suppressing a smile. About 3 weeks overdue. Caleb picked up his biscuit, took a deliberate bite, and chewed thoughtfully. Tastes fine to me. A few of the others laughed, and the tension broke. Daisy turned back to the stove, her heart pounding. She'd never lost her temper like that before. Not in front of a room full of men, not when her job might depend on staying quiet and agreeable. But she didn't regret it. Not even a little. When Wade came in 10 minutes later, the atmosphere had settled back into something almost normal. He took his seat, accepted his plate from Daisy, and ate without comment. She waited for him to say something about Riley storming out, about her outburst, about whether she'd crossed a line. But Wade just finished his breakfast, stood, and said, "Riley's on fence repair today. Alone. He needs time to think." Then he left. Beckett caught Daisy's eye and grinned. "I think that's Wade speak for good job." Daisy let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Later that afternoon, while she was peeling potatoes for supper, Riley appeared in the kitchen doorway. He stood there for a long moment, shifting his weight from foot to foot before finally speaking. "I'm sorry," he said, "about this morning, and about being an ass in general." Daisy kept peeling. "You mean that, or did Wade tell you to say it?" "Both, I guess." Riley ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I know I've been a jerk. He paused, searching for words. "I didn't think you'd last. None of us did. And when you kept going, kept proving us wrong, I guess it pissed me off." "Why?" "Because I've quit things. A lot of things. Jobs, relationships. Hell, I didn't even finish school. And here you are, tougher than most of the men I know, and you're—" He stopped himself. "A woman?" Daisy said flatly. "Fat? Not what you expected?" Riley winced. "Yeah, all of that, which makes me an asshole." Daisy set down the potato and the knife, turned to face him fully. "Yes, it does. I know, and I'm sorry. I'll do better." She studied him for a moment. He looked young suddenly, standing there with his hat in his hands, his face earnest in a way she hadn't seen before. "All right," she said. "We'll start over. But Riley?" "Yeah?" "You make one more comment about my cooking, and I'll put cayenne in your coffee." Riley laughed, surprised, and some of the tension went out of his shoulders. "Yes, ma'am." After he left, Daisy went back to her potatoes and found herself smiling. The days grew shorter and colder. By mid-October, the sun was setting before 5, and the temperatures were dropping below freezing most nights. Daisy learned to bank the fire in the kitchen stove so it wouldn't go out overnight, to wrap hot bricks in cloth and put them at the foot of her bed, to wear 2 pairs of socks and still wake up with cold feet. The men were working harder now, bringing the cattle down from the high pastures before the snow came. They'd leave before dawn and come back after dark, exhausted and filthy. And Daisy would have food waiting, stew that had been simmering all day, bread fresh from the oven, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She was learning their rhythms, their preferences. Caleb liked his coffee with a little sugar. Esteban wouldn't eat pork. Beckett had a sweet tooth and would sneak extra pieces of pie when he thought no one was looking. Jacob, his arm still splinted but healing well, always thanked her twice, once when she served him, once when he finished. And Wade was harder to read. He ate what she put in front of him without complaint, but also without praise. He never asked for seconds, but his plate was always clean. He rarely spoke at meals, just listened to the men talk about their day, and then left as soon as he was done. But Daisy was starting to notice things. The way he'd quietly refill the firewood stack outside her door when it got low. The way he'd fix the leak in the kitchen roof without mentioning it. The way he'd started taking his coffee the same way she made it for herself, black and strong, even though she'd seen him add sugar when he made his own. Small things. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Daisy was paying attention. One evening in late October, after the men had finished supper and gone to the bunkhouse, Wade stayed behind. Daisy was scrubbing the last of the pots when she heard him clear his throat. "That was good tonight," he said. She looked up, surprised. "The stew?" "All of it. The bread, too. And the pie." "It was just apple pie, nothing fancy." "It was good," he said again, and there was something in his voice that made her stop scrubbing and turn to face him. Wade was standing near the door, his hat in his hands, looking almost uncomfortable. It was strange to see him uncertain about anything. "Where'd you learn to cook like that, he asked. Daisy shrugged. "My mother, mostly. She ran a boarding house when I was growing up. I'd help in the kitchen after school, By the time I was 12, I could make a week's worth of meals with whatever was left in the pantry. She's still alive? No, she died when I was 17. Fever took her in about 3 days. I'm sorry. Daisy went back to scrubbing. It was a long time ago. Still, losing a parent's hard. Wade paused. My father died when I was 15, kicked by a horse, gone before the doctor could even get here. Is that when you took over the ranch? Had to. My mother tried to keep it going, but she didn't have the strength for it. Heart gave out 2 years later. After that, it was just me and Beckett and whoever we could hire on. Daisy had stopped pretending to scrub. She was listening now, really listening, because Wade Granger didn't talk about himself. Ever. And here he was, standing in her kitchen at 8 o'clock at night, telling her about his dead parents. How old are you now? She asked. 34. So you've been running this place for almost 20 years. 18. Yeah. That's a long time to be alone. Wade looked at her, and something passed across his face, something raw and quickly hidden. Gets easier. Does it? What? He didn't answer that. Instead, he put his hat back on and nodded toward the door. You should get some rest. It's going to snow tomorrow. How do you know? Air smells like it, and my knee's been aching all day. Never wrong about snow. He left before she could say anything else. Daisy stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the closed door, and wondered what the hell that conversation had been about. Wade was right about the snow. It started just after dawn. Big, fat flakes that fell slow and heavy, sticking to everything they touched. By noon, there were 3 inches on the ground. By supper, 6. By the time Daisy banked the fire and went to bed, the world outside her window was white and silent. She woke in the middle of the night to a sound she couldn't place at first. A rhythmic banging, like someone chopping wood, but wrong somehow. Too frantic, too desperate. She got out of bed, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and went to the window. In the dim light from the bunkhouse, she could see a figure in the yard swinging an axe at something. No, not something. The well. The well had frozen. Daisy grabbed her coat and boots and ran outside, the cold hitting her like a physical blow. The snow was still falling, and the wind had picked up, turning the flakes into stinging needles. Wade was at the well, his face set in grim determination, swinging the axe down again and again, trying to break through the ice that had formed over the water. Wade! She shouted over the wind. He didn't stop, just kept swinging, his breath coming out in ragged clouds. Daisy ran to him, grabbed his arm. Wade, stop! He finally looked at her, and she saw something wild in his eyes. We need water. Can't cook without water. Can't clean. Can't. We have the rain barrel, Daisy said. And I filled every pot and pan in the kitchen yesterday. We're fine for today. What about tomorrow? What about next week? If this well's frozen, then we'll melt snow. We'll figure it out. But you swinging an axe in the middle of the night isn't helping anything. Wade stood there, chest heaving, the axe hanging loose in his hand. Snow had collected on his shoulders, in his hair, on the brim of his hat. Come inside, Daisy said, gentler now. You're freezing. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're half frozen and exhausted. Come inside before you collapse out here. For a moment, she thought he'd argue, but then something in him seemed to break, and he let the axe fall into the snow. Daisy led him back to the kitchen, sat him down at the table, and built up the fire in the stove. She put water on to boil, found a clean towel, and handed it to him. Your hands, she said. Wade looked down. His hands were raw and bleeding, blisters torn open from the axe handle. Christ, he muttered. Daisy took the towel back, wet it with warm water from the kettle, and gently cleaned the blood away. Wade sat still as stone, watching her work. Why were you so worried about the well? She asked quietly. Because last time it froze, it took 3 weeks to thaw, and we lost 2 men to sickness because we couldn't keep things clean. When was that? 7 years ago, first winter after my mother died. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't prepare right, and men suffered for it. Daisy looked up at him. That's not going to happen this time. You don't know that. Yes, I do, because you're not that kid anymore. You've been doing this for 18 years, Wade. You know this mountain. You know this ranch. And you've got people around you now who know what they're doing. Like you, like me, like Beckett, like all of us. She finished wrapping his hands in clean cloth. You don't have to carry everything alone. Wade stared at her for a long moment, and Daisy felt something shift in the air between them, something that made her aware of how close they were sitting, how the firelight was making shadows dance across his face, how his eyes weren't cold anymore but warm and searching. "Why'd you really come here, Daisy?" he asked, his voice rough. The question caught her off guard. "I told you, I needed work." "That's not all of it." She looked away. "No, it's not." "Tell me." And maybe it was the late hour, or the intimacy of the moment, or the fact that Wade had just shown her something vulnerable and broken in himself. But Daisy found herself talking. "I was working at a hotel in Silver Falls," she said. "Respectable place, good wages. I'd been there almost 2 years. There was a man, Mr. Dennison, owned a dry goods store down the street, who'd been coming around the kitchen, making comments, standing too close. I told him to stop. He didn't. One day he cornered me in the pantry and put his hands on me. I shoved him. He fell, hit his head on a shelf. Nothing serious, just stunned, but he was angry. So he told his wife I'd propositioned him. She told everyone in town. Within a week, I was fired. No one would hire me after that. No one would even look at me. So I left." Wade's jaw had tightened as she spoke. "Where's Silver Falls?" 200 miles south. Why?" "Just wondering if it's worth the ride to go break his legs." The words were said so casually, so matter-of-fact, that it took Daisy a moment to process them. Then she laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that echoed in the quiet kitchen. Wade's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "You don't have to do that," Daisy said. "I know, but I want to." "Well, don't. He's not worth it. And besides, I ended up here, which is better than that hotel job ever was." "Is it?" Daisy looked around the kitchen, the scarred table, the temperamental stove, the shelves stacked with mismatched dishes. Then she looked at Wade, at his bandaged hands and tired eyes, and the way he was looking at her like she mattered. "Yeah," she said softly. "It is." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Finally, Wade stood. "You should get some sleep," he said. "Long day tomorrow." "You too." "I will." He paused at the door. "Thank you, Daisy, for tonight." "For what?" "Wrapping your hands." "For reminding me I'm not alone." He left before she could respond, and Daisy sat at the table for a long time after, staring at the fire and trying to understand what had just happened between them. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. It piled up in drifts taller than a man, buried the fences, made the world beyond the ranch invisible. The men couldn't work outside for more than an hour at a time without risking frostbite, so they spent their days doing indoor chores, mending tack, sharpening tools, playing cards in the bunkhouse. Daisy kept them fed. She made soup from ham hocks and dried beans, bread that she'd learned to bake in the finicky oven, dried apple pies with crusts that were finally starting to turn out right. She melted snow for water, rationed the supplies, and made every ingredient stretch as far as it could go. On the 4th day, the snow stopped and the sun came out, turning the landscape into something so bright it hurt to look at. Beckett organized a work crew to dig out the pathways between buildings. Wade and Caleb went to check on the cattle in the lower pasture. Riley and Esteban climbed onto the barn roof to clear the snow before it got too heavy. And Jacob, his arm finally healed enough to work again, came to the kitchen and asked if Daisy needed help with anything. "I'm fine," she said. "You should rest that arm." "It's been 6 weeks. I need to do something useful." He looked around the kitchen at the stack of firewood that needed splitting, the pots that needed scrubbing, the floors that needed sweeping. "Please, let me help." So Daisy let him. They worked side by side for hours, Jacob splitting wood, carrying water, hauling supplies from the root cellar. He didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. There was something companionable about the silence, something easy. When they finally stopped for coffee, Jacob sat at the table and looked at his arm, flexing the fingers carefully. "I never thanked you properly," he said, "for setting it. You thanked me plenty. I mean, really thanked you. If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't known what to do, I would have lost this arm. Or worse." Daisy poured him more coffee. "You would have been fine. Beckett would have figured something out." "Maybe. But you're the one who did it. You didn't hesitate. You just—" He paused, searching for words. You just handled it like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't natural. I was terrified. You didn't show it. Daisy sat down across from him. You want to know a secret, Jacob? I'm terrified most of the time. Every day I wake up scared that I'm going to screw something up, burn the food, poison someone with bad meat, prove everyone right who said I shouldn't be here. But being scared doesn't mean you get to quit. It just means you keep going anyway. Jacob nodded slowly. That's the bravest thing I ever heard. It's not bravery. It's stubbornness. Same thing, sometimes. Later that evening, after supper was finished and the men had gone to the bunkhouse, Wade found Daisy outside by the woodpile. She was standing in the snow, looking up at the stars. They were brilliant tonight, cold and clear and infinite. You'll freeze out here, Wade said. I needed air. It's been 4 days inside that kitchen. Fair enough. Wade moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Jacob said you two had a good talk today. He's a good kid. He is, and he thinks the world of you. Daisy smiled. He's young. He'll get over it. I don't think so. Wade paused. You have a way with people, Daisy. You make them feel seen, valued. That's rare out here. Out here. It's rare everywhere. Wade looked at her then, really looked at her, and Daisy felt her breath catch. I'm glad you stayed, he said quietly. You gave me a chance. That's more than most people did. I almost didn't. When you first got off that wagon, I thought you'd be gone in 3 days. What changed your mind? You did. You were stubborn and proud, and you didn't quit even when everything was against you. That's the kind of person who survives up here. He paused. That's the kind of person I need. But the words hung into the cold air between them, heavy with meaning Daisy wasn't sure she should read into. Wade, I'm not good at this, he interrupted. Talking, saying what I mean. I've spent too many years alone and I've forgotten how to... He stopped, frustrated. What I'm trying to say is, you matter. To this ranch. To the men. To me. Daisy's heart was pounding. Wade, I don't... You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He turned to go, but Daisy reached out and caught his arm. Wade stopped, looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. You matter to me too, she said softly. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world was silent except for the wind and the distant sound of the men laughing in the bunkhouse. Then Wade lifted his hand and touched her cheek just once, so gently it felt like a question. Daisy didn't pull away. Good night, Daisy, Wade said, his voice rough. Good night. He walked back to the house, and Daisy stood alone in the snow, her cheeks still warm from his touch, and wondered how her life had gotten so complicated in just 2 months. November brought a cold so deep it felt like the mountain itself had turned hostile. The kind of cold that made your teeth ache, that turned your breath to ice crystals in the air, that snuck through every crack and gap in the buildings, no matter how much you stuffed them with rags and newspaper. Daisy had never experienced anything like it. Back in Silver Falls, winter meant rain and maybe a light frost. Here, winter was a living thing, relentless, brutal, testing every weakness it could find. She learned to sleep in layers, to wrap hot stones in flannel and tuck them under the blankets, to keep a candle burning on the bedside table because sometimes the small flame was the only thing that kept the darkness from feeling absolute. She learned that frostbite could happen in minutes, that metal would freeze to bare skin, that the well they'd finally managed to thaw would freeze again and again, requiring constant vigilance. The men were struggling too. They moved slower in the mornings, their joints stiff from the cold. Minor injuries took longer to heal. Tempers ran shorter. Being trapped inside by weather that made outdoor work impossible turned the bunkhouse into a powder keg of boredom and frustration. And through it all, Daisy cooked. She made hot meals 3 times a day, thick stews that could warm you from the inside out, bread that came out of the oven steaming, pies made from the preserves she'd put up in October. She kept the coffee pot going constantly, kept the kitchen warm and bright, kept the heart of the ranch beating even when everything outside felt dead and frozen. It was exhausting. But it was also the first time in her life that Daisy felt truly essential. Not tolerated, not accepted reluctantly, but needed in a way that had nothing to do with pity or obligation. The thing with Wade had grown complicated. After that night in the snow, something had shifted between them. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would notice. But Daisy felt it every time he walked into the kitchen, every time their eyes met across the table, every time he found a reason to stay after the other men had left. He talked more now. Not a lot. Wade would never be chatty, but enough. He told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd next spring, about the years when he'd nearly lost everything to drought and disease and his own inexperience. He asked about her life before, and Daisy found herself telling him things she'd never told anyone. About her father who'd left when she was 5, about her mother's boarding house and the endless parade of strangers who'd passed through, about the loneliness of being the fat girl in a small town, always watching other people's lives happen while hers stayed stuck in place. Wade listened without judgment, without offering platitudes or trying to fix things. He just listened, and somehow that was enough. But there was tension too. The kind that built in the spaces between words, in the moments when their hands would brush reaching for the same thing, in the way Wade's gaze would linger on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. Daisy didn't know what to do with it. She'd had men look at her before, usually with disgust or disappointment, or that particular cruelty that came from knowing they could hurt her with a word. But Wade looked at her like she was something valuable, something worth protecting. It scared her more than the cold ever could. Beckett noticed, of course. The old foreman didn't miss much. He cornered Daisy one afternoon while she was in the root cellar, checking the potato supply. She heard his boots on the stairs and looked up to find him standing in the doorway, arms crossed, wearing an expression that was half amused, half concerned. "You and Wade," he said without preamble. Daisy's stomach dropped. "What about us?" "Don't play dumb. I've known that man since he was 15 years old, and I've never seen him act like this." "Like what?" "Like he gives a damn about something other than this ranch." Beckett moved further into the cellar, his breath misting in the cold air. "He's smiling, Daisy. Not often, and not big, but it's there. And he's talking, actually having conversations instead of just grunting orders. So I'm trying to figure out if this is going to be a problem." Daisy straightened, bristling. "There's nothing happening between us. Yet. Ever. Wade's my employer. I work here. That's all." Beckett studied her for a long moment. "You really believe that?" "It's the truth." "Truth and belief aren't always the same thing." He sighed, rubbed his face. "Look, I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I like you, Daisy. You're good for this place, and you're good for Wade. I just want to make sure you know what you're getting into." "I'm not getting into anything." Wade Granger is the most stubborn, closed-off, emotionally constipated man I've ever met. He spent half his life building walls around himself because he's lost everyone he ever cared about. His father, his mother, 2 brothers to disease, a woman he was supposed to marry who took one look at this mountain and ran. Beckett's voice was gentle but firm. "If you're going to be with him, you need to understand that. He's not going to be easy. He's not going to sweep you off your feet with pretty words. He's barely going to know how to be a partner because he's forgotten how to let anyone in." "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because I've also never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And I think maybe, just maybe, you could be the one who gets through to him, but only if you're brave enough to try." Daisy felt her throat tighten. "I'm not brave, Beckett. I'm just trying to survive." "Same thing out here." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. If you hurt him, I'll make your life hell. And if he hurts you, I'll break his jaw. Fair warning to both of you." He left Daisy standing alone among the potato bins, her heart racing, her mind spinning with thoughts she'd been trying to avoid for weeks. That evening, Wade came to the kitchen after supper while Daisy was kneading bread for the next morning. She heard the door open and knew without looking that it was him. She'd learned the sound of his walk, the particular way he moved through space. "Need help?" he asked. "You know how to knead bread?" "No, but I can learn." Daisy smiled despite herself. "Wash your hands first." Wade did, then came to stand beside her at the table. Daisy showed him the motion: push, fold, turn, repeat, and watched as he tried to copy it. His hands were too rough, his movements too forceful, and the dough fought back. "Gentler," Daisy said. "You're wrestling it. You need to work with it." Wade tried again, and this time it was better. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the slap of dough against wood and the crackle of the fire. Beckett talked to you today, Wade said finally. It wasn't a question. Daisy kept kneading. How'd you know? Because he talked to me too, gave me the same speech he's been giving me for the past month, which is that I need to stop being an idiot and tell you how I feel. Daisy's hand stilled. Wade, let me finish. He stopped kneading, turned to face her fully. I'm not good at this, Daisy. I don't know how to... I've spent so long alone that I don't even know where to start. But I need you to know that you're not just the cook. You're not just someone who works here. You're... He struggled, the words clearly costing him. You matter more than I know how to say. Daisy's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Why are you telling me this? Because Beckett's right. Because I'm tired of pretending I don't feel things. Because every day I watch you work yourself to exhaustion keeping this place running, and I think about what it would be like if you weren't here, and it makes me... He stopped, jaw tight. It scares me. How much I need you. Wade, Daisy didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the inevitable hurt that came from wanting things she couldn't have. But another part, a deeper part, wanted to stay. To reach out. To take the risk. You don't have to say anything, Wade said quietly. I just needed you to know. But Daisy was tired of being afraid, tired of protecting herself at the cost of everything else. I need you too, she said, the words coming out barely above a whisper. And that terrifies me. Wade's expression softened. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he cupped her face in his flour-dusted hands. We can be terrified together, he said, and then he kissed her. It wasn't graceful. Their noses bumped, and Wade's hands left flour smudges on her cheeks, and Daisy's breath caught in a way that was more panic than passion. But it was real. It was honest. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daisy felt something in her chest crack open. Something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Well, she said shakily, that was overdue, Wade finished. Daisy laughed, surprised and breathless. Yeah, that... They stood close for a moment longer, foreheads almost touching, the bread forgotten on the table between them. Then the kitchen door banged open and Riley burst in, face pale, words tumbling out in a rush. Wade, you need to come. Now. It's Caleb. He collapsed in the barn. We can't wake him up. The warmth drained from the room like someone had opened a window to the frozen night. Wade was already moving, grabbing his coat, heading for the door. Daisy followed without thinking, not bothering with her coat, running through the snow in just her dress and apron. The barn was chaos. The men had carried Caleb inside and laid him on a pile of hay, but he was unconscious, his face gray, his breathing shallow and labored. Esteban was on his knees beside him, checking for a pulse, his face grim. What happened? Wade demanded. We were moving hay bales, Riley said, his voice shaking. He said he felt dizzy, then he grabbed his chest and went down. Daisy pushed through the circle of men and knelt beside Caleb. She pressed her fingers to his neck, felt the weak, irregular flutter of his pulse. His skin was cold and clammy, his lips tinged blue. His heart, she said. Can you help him? Wade asked, and there was something raw in his voice. Daisy looked up at the circle of faces staring at her, hoping, desperate, waiting for her to work another miracle like she had with Jacob. But setting a broken bone was one thing. A failing heart was something else entirely. I don't know, she said honestly. We need to keep him warm, keep him comfortable, and we need a doctor. Nearest doctor's 15 miles down the mountain, Beckett said, and the trails snowed in. We'd never make it in the dark. Then we go at first light, Wade said. Riley, saddle the fastest horse. Esteban, get blankets. Everyone you can find. Jacob, heat water, and bring it here. Move. The men scattered to their tasks, and Daisy stayed with Caleb, holding his cold hand, murmuring reassurances she wasn't sure he could hear. Wade knelt beside her. What can I do? Pray, Daisy said, then caught herself. Or whatever you do up here. I don't pray, haven't in years. Then just stay, please. Wade stayed, They kept vigil through the night. The men took turns sitting with Caleb, keeping the fire going, making sure he stayed covered. Daisy made coffee and forced the men to eat, even though no one had much appetite. She checked Caleb's pulse every hour, noted the way his breathing would sometimes hitch and stop for seconds that felt like hours before starting again. As dawn broke gray and cold, Caleb opened his eyes. "What?" he croaked, confused. "What happened?" Relief flooded the barn so strong you could taste it. "Your heart gave you a scare," Daisy said, squeezing his hand. "But you're still here. Feel like hell. Good. That means you're alive." She looked up at Wade. "We still need a doctor. He needs medicine, rest, someone who knows more than I do." Wade nodded. "Riley leaves in 10 minutes. But before Riley could even get to the barn, they heard it, a sound that made every man in the barn go still. Thunder, distant but unmistakable. Wade's face went white. "No." He ran outside and Daisy followed. The sky to the west was dark, not with night, but with clouds so black they looked solid. And beneath them, a wall of white was moving across the valley like a living thing. "Storm," Beckett said from behind them, his voice flat. "Big one." "How long?" Wade asked. "Hour? Maybe less." Wade turned to Riley. "You can't go. You'd die before you got halfway down." "Then what do we do?" Riley asked, and for the first time since Daisy had met him, he looked genuinely scared. Wade looked at the approaching storm, then back at the barn where Caleb lay dying, then at Daisy. "We survive," he said, "like we always do." The storm hit like the end of the world. Wind that screamed and tore at everything, snow so thick you couldn't see 3 feet, cold that cut through every layer of clothing like it wasn't there. Within an hour, the drifts were waist-high. Within 2, they'd lost visibility between the buildings. Wade ordered everyone into the main house. They couldn't risk anyone getting lost trying to move between the barn and the bunkhouse. They carried Caleb carefully, set him up in Wade's own room close to the fireplace, and then Wade gathered the men in the kitchen. "We stay together," he said, his voice cutting through the roar of wind outside. "No one goes out for any reason. We have food, water, firewood for maybe 3 days if we're careful. The animals in the barn will have to fend for themselves." "What about Caleb?" Esteban asked. "We keep him warm, keep him stable, and hope the storm breaks before—" Wade didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Daisy took charge of the kitchen like it was a military operation. She inventoried every scrap of food, rationed the water, set up a rotation for keeping the fires going. The men, scared and restless, needed tasks to keep them from panic, so she put them to work, hauling firewood from the covered woodpile before it became inaccessible, melting snow for extra water, sealing gaps around windows and doors. Jacob, his arm finally strong enough for real work, helped Daisy prepare a massive pot of stew that could feed them all for days. Riley, surprisingly, didn't complain once. Even Wade, who usually gave orders from a distance, worked alongside the men, his face set in grim determination. But beneath the organized chaos, fear hummed like a plucked string. They were trapped, cut off from help. And somewhere in the next room, Caleb was dying. Night fell, though it was hard to tell. The storm had turned the world into a uniform gray-black, howling and violent. The men ate in shifts, keeping someone with Caleb at all times. Daisy checked on him every hour, noting the way his pulse grew weaker, his breathing more labored. She was coming out of Wade's room around midnight when she found Wade himself standing in the hallway, staring at nothing. "You should rest," she said quietly. "Can't." "Wade, he's dying, Daisy, in my house, in my bed, and there's nothing I can do about it." The rawness in his voice made her chest ache. She moved closer, not touching him yet, just being near. "Caleb's been with me since the beginning," Wade continued. "When my father died and I didn't know what the hell I was doing, Caleb stayed. When my mother got sick and the ranch was falling apart, Caleb held it together. He's more than a hand. He's family, the only family I have left. He's still alive. For how long? We're snowed in, no doctor, no medicine, nothing." Daisy reached out then, took his hand. It was freezing despite the warmth of the house. "Then we make him comfortable. We sit with him. We make sure he's not alone. That's all we can do." Wade looked at her, and in the dim lamplight, his eyes were shining. How are you so calm? I'm not. I'm terrified. But being terrified doesn't change what needs to be done. Wade pulled her close then, sudden and desperate, wrapping his arms around her like she was an anchor in a storm. Daisy held him back, feeling the tension in his shoulders, the way his breath hitched. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dark hallway while the storm raged outside and death waited in the next room. The storm didn't break. Day 2, and the wind was somehow worse. Snow had drifted so high against the house that the windows on the north side were completely buried. The world had shrunk to just this building, these people, the finite resources that were ticking down with every hour. Caleb drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he'd wake and talk, his voice weak but coherent, telling stories about the old days, about Wade's father, about storms he'd survived before. Other times, he'd sleep for hours, so still that Daisy would have to check his pulse to make sure he was still breathing. The men were holding together, but barely. Tempers were fraying. Riley and Esteban got into a shouting match over nothing, who'd used the last of the coffee, or something equally stupid, and had to be separated by Beckett. Jacob sat by the window for hours, staring at the wall of white, his face pale and drawn. Daisy kept cooking, kept organizing, kept everyone moving. But inside, she was calculating. The food would last another 2 days, maybe 3 if they stretched it. The firewood would hold for 4 days, assuming the temperature didn't drop further. After that, she didn't let herself think about after that. On the 3rd day, something changed. Caleb woke around dawn and asked for Wade. Daisy, who'd been sitting with him, ran to get him. Wade came immediately, knelt beside the bed. "I'm here." "Listen to me," Caleb said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need to stop blaming yourself for every damn thing that goes wrong on this mountain." "Caleb, I mean it. You've been carrying this place on your back since you were a kid, and it's killing you. You can't control the weather. You can't stop people from dying. You can't fix everything." "I should have gotten you to a doctor before the storm." "Wouldn't have mattered. My heart's been bad for years. I knew this was coming." Caleb reached up with a shaking hand and gripped Wade's shoulder. "You're a good man, Wade Granger. Better than you think. And you deserve to be happy. Stop punishing yourself and let yourself have that." Wade's jaw was tight, his eyes red. "I don't know how." "You start by admitting you're not alone anymore. You've got good men here. You've got Beckett. And you've got that girl who looks at you like you hung the moon even though you're too stubborn to notice." Wade glanced at Daisy, who was standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "She's stronger than both of us combined," Caleb said. "Don't let her go." "I won't. Promise me." "I promise." Caleb smiled, satisfied, and closed his eyes. His breathing evened out, and for a moment Daisy thought he'd just fallen asleep, but then the breathing stopped. Wade stayed kneeling beside the bed for a long time, holding Caleb's hand, his head bowed. Daisy moved to stand beside him, resting her hand on his shoulder, and felt the silent shaking that meant he was crying. The other men came when they heard. They stood in the doorway, hats in hands, faces grief-stricken. Beckett's shoulders shook. Riley wiped his eyes roughly. Jacob looked like he might be sick. "He was a good man," Beckett said finally. "The best," Wade agreed, his voice thick. They held a vigil that day. The storm was still raging outside, but inside they gathered in the main room and told stories about Caleb, about his terrible jokes and his skill with horses, and the time he'd gotten drunk and tried to wrestle a bear. The stories were funny and sad and necessary, and by the end of it, everyone was crying and laughing in equal measure. Daisy made a meal, the best she could manage with what they had, and they ate together, toasting Caleb's memory with melted snow since the whiskey had run out 2 days ago. And that night, when everyone else had finally gone to sleep, Wade came to find Daisy in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table, staring at nothing, exhausted beyond words. "Thank you," Wade said. "For what?" "For keeping us together, for keeping me together." He sat down across from her. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have." "No, I would have fallen apart. But you held the line. You kept everyone fed and warm and working. You gave them hope when there wasn't any reason to have it." Daisy shook her head. I was just cooking, Wade. You were doing a hell of a lot more than that. He reached across the table and took her hand. Caleb was right. You're stronger than both of us. Stronger than anyone I've ever met. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on. That's what strength is, holding on when everything's falling apart. They sat in silence for a while, hands clasped across the scarred wood table, the only sound the wind outside and the crackle of the dying fire. When the storm breaks, Wade said finally, we'll bury him proper, on the hill overlooking the valley. He always said that's where he wanted to be. That's good. And then, Wade paused, gathering courage. And then I want to talk. About us. About what comes next. Daisy's heart stuttered. Wade, I'm not asking for an answer now. I'm just saying, after we get through this, I want to try. If you're willing. Daisy looked at him. This hard, closed-off man who'd somehow opened himself up to her, who'd lost so much, and was still brave enough to risk more. I'm willing, she said softly. Wade's face broke into something that wasn't quite a smile but was close enough. He stood, came around the table and kissed her forehead. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow's going to be hard. He was right. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving behind a world buried under 4 feet of snow. The men dug out slowly, carefully, checking on the animals first. They'd lost 2 cattle and one of the horses, frozen in the barn when the door had gotten blocked by a drift. But the rest had survived, and that was something. They buried Caleb on the 5th day, on a morning so cold and clear it hurt to breathe. Wade said a few words, simple, honest, from the heart, and the men took turns shoveling dirt over the grave. Daisy stood beside Wade, not touching him but close enough that he could feel her there, and watched the sun rise over the mountains, turning the snow to gold. It was beautiful and terrible and final. And when it was done, when the last shovelful of dirt had been placed and the men had walked back down the hill, Wade and Daisy stood alone by the grave. He would have liked you, Wade said. He did like me. He told me so. When? A few weeks ago. He said I was good for you, that you smiled more. Daisy paused. Was he right? Wade looked at her, and this time he did smile. Small and sad, but real. Yeah, he said. He was right. The days after Caleb's death were the quietest Daisy had ever experienced on the ranch. The men moved through their work like ghosts, speaking only when necessary, eating meals in near silence. Even Riley, who usually filled every quiet moment with some comment or complaint, kept his mouth shut and his head down. Wade took it the hardest. He threw himself into work with a ferocity that worried Daisy, up before dawn, outside until well after dark, pushing himself and the men through tasks that could have waited. He was trying to outrun his grief, and everyone knew it, but no one knew how to stop him. Daisy tried. She'd catch him coming in from the cold and force coffee into his hands, make him sit for 5 minutes, ask about his day. Sometimes he'd answer. More often he'd just shake his head and disappear into whatever needed fixing next. She understood. Grief didn't follow a schedule, didn't care about convenience or timing. You dealt with it however you could, even if the way you dealt with it was pretending it wasn't there. But she also knew that kind of running only worked for so long before you collapsed. It was Beckett who finally intervened. Daisy was in the kitchen one evening, punching down bread dough with more force than necessary, when the foreman came through the door looking grim. He's going to kill himself, Beckett said without preamble. I know. Today he was on the barn roof in that wind, replacing shingles we don't need replaced until spring, nearly fell twice, didn't even seem to notice. Daisy's hand stilled in the dough. What do you want me to do about it? Talk to him. He'll listen to you. He won't listen to anyone right now. He might. Beckett pulled out a chair and sat heavily. Look, Wade's been alone most of his life. Lost his father young, lost his mother right after, lost the woman he was supposed to marry, and now Caleb. Every person he's ever cared about has left him one way or another, so he does what he knows how to do. He works. He controls what he can control and ignores everything else. I know all this, Beckett. Do you? Because I'm not sure you understand what that means for you. Beckett's voice was gentle but firm. Wade's falling in love with you, Daisy. Maybe already has. And that terrifies him because everyone he's ever loved has left him standing alone in the end. Daisy felt something twist in her chest. He hasn't said anything like that. Of course he hasn't. He barely knows how to say good morning. But I've known that man for 20 years, and I'm telling you, he's in deeper than he knows how to handle. Which means, if you're not serious about this, if you're planning to leave come spring, you need to tell him now, before it gets worse. I'm not planning to leave. Are you planning to stay? The question hung in the air between them. Daisy looked down at her hands, covered in flour and dough, and thought about the past 4 months, about arriving with nothing and building something, about the kitchen that had become hers, the men who'd become familiar, the mountain that had stopped feeling like an enemy and started feeling like home, about Wade, with his gray eyes and careful hands, and the way he looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been too afraid to ask. Yes, she said quietly. I'm planning to stay. Beckett nodded slowly. Then you need to make him understand that, because right now he's convinced you're going to realize you deserve better and leave. And he's trying to prepare for it by pushing everyone away, including you. That's stupid. That's grief and fear and a lifetime of loss. Beckett stood, headed for the door. Talk to him, Daisy, tonight, before he does something that can't be undone. After Beckett left, Daisy stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the bread dough and thinking about courage and risk and all the ways loving someone could go wrong. Then she washed her hands, put on her coat, and went to find Wade. He wasn't in the house, wasn't in the barn or the bunkhouse or any of the sheds. Daisy was starting to worry when she saw a light in the distance. The small equipment shed at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the twilight. She walked through ankle-deep snow, her breath misting in the cold air, and pushed open the shed door. Wade was inside, surrounded by tools and leather tack, mending a bridle by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Something wrong? He asked. That's what I came to ask you. Wade went back to his work. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're working yourself to death and refusing to talk to anyone. There's work that needs doing. Not at 8 o'clock at night in a freezing shed. Daisy moved closer and Wade's hands stilled on the leather. Wade, you can't keep doing this. Doing what? Running, pushing everyone away, pretending Caleb didn't die and it doesn't hurt. Wade's jaw tightened. I'm not pretending anything. Yes, you are. You're pretending that if you just work hard enough, you won't have to feel it. But that's not how grief works. It doesn't go away because you ignore it. What do you want me to do, Daisy? Fall apart? Cry on your shoulder? That's not who I am. I want you to let yourself be human, to admit that you're hurting and you need help. Wade stood abruptly, the bridle falling to the workbench. I don't need help. I need people to stop acting like I'm broken. You're not broken. You're grieving. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it feels pretty much the same. Wade's voice was rising now, frustration and pain bleeding through. Caleb died, Daisy, in my house, in my bed, because I couldn't get him to a doctor in time, because I chose to build this ranch in the middle of nowhere, so far from help that when people need it, they die waiting. That's not your fault, isn't it? This ranch, this isolation, it's all my doing. I could have built closer to town, could have made it easier to get help, but I wanted to be alone, wanted to be so far from everything that no one could reach me. And now Caleb's dead because of it. Daisy moved closer, reached for his hand. Wade jerked away. Don't. Wade, I mean it. Don't try to make this better with words or touch or whatever you think is going to help. Nothing helps. Nothing changes the fact that I've lost everyone I've ever cared about, and one day I'm going to lose you too. There it was, the truth beneath the anger and the work and the running. Daisy's voice was steady when she spoke. You're right. Wade looked at her, surprised. One day you'll lose me, Daisy continued. Either I'll die or you'll die, or something will happen that pulls us apart. That's life. That's the risk of caring about anyone. But Wade, if you spend your whole life preparing for that loss, you miss everything that comes before it. I'm trying to protect myself. No, you're trying to survive. There's a difference. Surviving is getting through each day. Living is letting yourself feel things, even when it hurts, even when it scares you. Wade's shoulders slumped. The fight went out of him all at once, leaving him looking exhausted and lost. I don't know how to do that. Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together. Wade looked at her for a long moment, and Daisy saw the war happening behind his eyes, the instinct to push her away, fighting against the desperate need to let her in. Finally, he moved, closed the distance between them, and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight it almost hurt. Daisy wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling the way his whole body was shaking. I'm scared, Wade said against her hair, his voice barely audible. I know, me too. What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one day and realize you made a mistake staying here, staying with me? What if I don't? What if this is exactly where I'm supposed to be? Wade pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes were red, his expression raw. Why? Why would you choose this? Choose me? You could go anywhere, do anything. You don't have to stay on this mountain with a man who doesn't know how to talk about his feelings. Daisy reached up and cupped his face in her hands. Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I matter. Not because of what I look like or what people expect me to be, but because of who I actually am. You see me, Wade, really see me. And I see you too, all the broken, scared, stubborn parts, and I'm choosing to stay anyway. Wade's breath hitched. I don't deserve you. Stop deciding what you deserve and just accept that I'm here, that I want to be here. She paused. Unless you don't want me to stay. If you want me to leave come spring, tell me now. But don't push me away because you're scared. That's not fair to either of us. I don't want you to leave, Wade said immediately. He stopped, struggling. I want you to stay. I want to try to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you. I want to stop being so damn scared all the time. Then let's start there, one day at a time. No promises about forever, just a promise to try. Wade nodded, and then he was kissing her, desperate and grateful and filled with all the things he couldn't say. Daisy kissed him back, pouring her own fear and hope into it, and for a moment the world outside the shed disappeared. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. I'm going to be terrible at this, he said. Probably. But I'm pretty stubborn. I'll keep pushing until you get it right. Wade laughed, a short, surprised sound that turned into something that might have been a sob. Daisy held him through it, through the grief that finally broke free, through the tears he'd been holding back for days. And when it was over, when Wade had cried himself empty and stood shaking in her arms, Daisy led him back to the house. The next morning, Wade came to breakfast for the first time in a week. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed, but there was something different about him, something looser, less brittle. The men noticed. Beckett caught Daisy's eye across the table and nodded once, approving. Over the following weeks, the ranch slowly came back to life. The grief didn't disappear, it never would, but it settled into something manageable. The men told stories about Caleb during meals, laughed about his terrible card-playing skills and his habit of singing off-key when he thought no one was listening. Wade started talking more. Not a lot, but enough. He'd sit in the kitchen after supper and tell Daisy about his day, about problems with the herd or plans for spring. Sometimes he'd ask about her past, and Daisy would share pieces of herself she'd kept locked away for years. It wasn't easy. There were days when Wade would retreat back into silence, when the weight of everything would push him under, and Daisy would have to decide whether to pull him back out or give him space. There were nights when Daisy would lie awake wondering if she'd made the right choice, if staying on this isolated mountain with a man who struggled to express basic emotions was really what she wanted. But then morning would come, and Wade would appear in the kitchen doorway with that small, almost smile, and Daisy would remember why she'd chosen this, why she kept choosing it. December arrived with brutal cold and more snow. The ranch was buried under drifts that made the November storm look like a light dusting, but this time they were prepared. The food stores were full, the firewood stacked high, the animals secure in reinforced shelters. And this time, when the men gathered in the main house to wait out the weather, it felt less like survival and more like community. Jacob taught Esteban how to play chess using pieces carved from wood. Riley discovered he had a talent for storytelling and kept them entertained with tall tales that got more elaborate each night. Beckett whittled and offered dry commentary on everything. and Wade sat beside Daisy, their shoulders touching, occasionally reaching for her hand under the table when he thought no one was looking. It was during one of these storms, late at night when the others had gone to bed, that Wade finally said the words. They were in the kitchen, Daisy washing dishes while Wade dried. It had become their routine, these quiet moments after everyone else had gone to sleep, working side by side in comfortable silence. "I love you," Wade said suddenly, not looking at her, his hand still on the plate he was drying. Daisy's hand stilled in the water. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "What? I love you," Wade repeated, louder this time, finally meeting her eyes. "I'm not good at saying it. I'll probably mess it up constantly. But I need you to know. You asked me once why I wanted you to stay, and I didn't have the words then. But I have them now. I love you, Daisy Callahan. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to back down from anything. I love how you take care of everyone on this ranch like they're your family. I love the way you look at me like I'm worth something." He paused, swallowed hard. "And I know I'm not easy. I know I'm closed off and difficult and I have 100 problems I don't know how to fix. But if you'll have me anyway, I promise I'll try. I'll try to be better, to be the kind of man you deserve." Daisy's vision blurred with tears. She pulled her hands from the water, dried them quickly on her apron, and crossed to where Wade stood. "You don't have to be different than you are," she said, her voice shaking. "I fell in love with you exactly as you are, stubborn, quiet, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. I love you too, Wade. I have for weeks now. I was just too scared to say it." Wade's face broke into the biggest smile she'd ever seen on him. He pulled her close and kissed her, gentle this time, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. When they pulled apart, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" "Now? We keep going. We survive the winter. We figure out how to be together. We take it one day at a time." "That's it?" "That's everything." Wade nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." The storm that had been building outside chose that moment to intensify. The wind howled like something alive, and snow beat against the windows with enough force to rattle the glass. But inside the kitchen, wrapped in Wade's arms, Daisy felt warm and safe, and for the first time in her life, completely certain that she was exactly where she belonged. The storm raged for 3 more days. On the second day, something happened that tested everything. Daisy woke in the middle of the night to screaming. She bolted out of bed and ran toward the sound. Wade closed behind her to find Riley in the hallway, doubled over in pain. "My side," Riley gasped. "Something's wrong. It hurts." Wade got him into the kitchen, laid him on the table under the lamplight. Daisy pressed her hands to Riley's abdomen, felt the way he flinched when she touched the lower right side. Her stomach dropped. "Appendix," she said quietly. Wade went pale. "Are you sure?" "No, but I think so. Fever, pain in the lower right abdomen, the way he's guarding it." She looked at Wade. "If I'm right, we need to get him to a doctor, now." "We can't, the storm." "I know." Daisy's mind was racing, running through everything she knew about appendicitis, which wasn't much. If it bursts, he'll die. Blood poisoning. We'd have maybe a day, 2 if we're lucky. What do we do? Daisy looked at Riley, who was white-faced and shaking, then at Wade, then at Beckett, who'd appeared in the doorway with the other men crowding behind him. "We wait," she said finally. "We keep him comfortable, watch for signs it's getting worse. Sometimes they resolve on their own. Sometimes they burst. We won't know which until it happens." "And if it bursts?" Jacob asked, his voice small. Daisy didn't answer. She didn't have to. They set up a bed for Riley in the kitchen, close to the fire. Daisy made him as comfortable as possible, gave him small sips of water, monitored his fever. The men took turns sitting with him, and Wade didn't leave the kitchen for more than a few minutes at a time. The first night was the worst. Riley's fever spiked, and the pain got so bad he was crying, begging for something to make it stop. Daisy had nothing to give him except water and cold compresses and her presence. She sat beside him, holding his hand, talking to him about nothing, about her childhood, about the boarding house, about the first time she'd tried to bake bread and nearly burned down the kitchen. "I was awful to you," Riley said at one point, his voice weak. When you first got here, I was such a bastard. You apologized. We're past it. Are we? Because if I die, I need to know you forgave me. You're not going to die, Riley. But if I do, I forgave you weeks ago, Daisy said firmly. Now stop talking like that and save your strength. Riley managed a weak smile. Yes, ma'am. By the third day, the fever started to break. The pain was still there, but less intense. Riley could sit up without crying, could drink water without vomiting. I think it's resolving, Daisy told Wade, not letting herself believe it yet. I think he's going to make it. Wade looked at Riley, who was sleeping fitfully, his color slowly returning to normal. You saved him. I didn't do anything. I just kept him comfortable and hoped. You did more than that. You kept him calm. Kept all of us calm. Without you, Wade shook his head. He would have panicked, would have made it worse. You gave him something to hold on to. We all did. Everyone took turns sitting with him, because you showed them how. Wade took her hand. You're incredible. You know that? Daisy felt her face flush. Don't say you're just doing your job. Don't diminish what you did. Wade's voice was intense. You've saved 2 men on this ranch now. 3, if you count me. I didn't save you. Yes, you did, just in a different way. Before Daisy could respond, Riley stirred and opened his eyes. Am I dead? He croaked. Not yet, Daisy said, relief flooding through her. How do you feel? Like I got kicked by a horse, but better than yesterday. Good. That means you're healing. Riley looked at Wade, then at Daisy, then back at Wade. You two are together now, aren't you? Wade stiffened slightly, but Daisy squeezed his hand. Yes. Good. Took you long enough. Riley closed his eyes again. Wade, you're an idiot if you let her go. Daisy, you're a saint for putting up with him. Go back to sleep, Riley, Wade said, but there was warmth in his voice. Riley did, and Wade pulled Daisy close, pressing a kiss to her temple. A saint, he muttered. He might be right about that. He's definitely right about you being an idiot. Wade laughed quietly, and the sound filled the kitchen like light. When the storm finally broke on the 4th day, the world outside was transformed. The sun came out bright and harsh, turning the snow into something that hurt to look at. The men began digging out, clearing pathways, checking on animals. Riley was weak but recovering. Daisy had him on a strict diet, broth and bread, nothing heavy, and was monitoring him carefully for any signs of relapse. But the crisis had passed. That evening, as Daisy was preparing supper, Wade came into the kitchen and stood watching her work. What? She asked, feeling self-conscious under his gaze. I was thinking, Wade said, about what happens next, after winter. What about it? I want you to know that you don't have to keep sleeping in that small room. There's space in the main house. My room is... He stopped, looking uncomfortable. What I'm trying to say is, I want you to move in with me, properly. Not just as the cook, as... He struggled for the word. As your partner? Daisy offered. Yes, as my partner. In everything. Daisy set down the knife she'd been using and turned to face him fully. Are you asking me to live with you, Wade Granger? I'm asking you to build a life with me. Here, on this ranch. I know it's not much. I know the winters are hard and the isolation is harder. But this is my home, Daisy, and I want it to be yours too. Really yours, not just because you work here. Daisy felt her throat tighten. What are you saying? Wade crossed to her, took both her hands in his. I'm saying I want to marry you. Not right now, not today, but someday, when you're ready. When you believe that I mean it. Wade, let me finish. I know we haven't known each other long. I know I'm difficult, and I have a lot to work on. But I also know that I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me want to be better. You make this place feel like a home instead of just a ranch. And I'm asking, begging really, for you to give me the chance to make you happy. Or at least to try. Daisy's eyes were streaming now, tears running down her face unchecked. You already make me happy, You stubborn idiot. Is that a yes? It's a yes to moving in with you. It's a yes to building a life together. And she took a shaky breath. It's a yes to someday, when we're both ready. Wade pulled her into his arms and held her tight. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the kitchen while the sun set outside and the ranch settled into evening quiet. And Daisy thought about how far she'd come from that first day when she'd stepped off the wagon with nothing but fear and determination, how she'd arrived as an outsider and become essential, how she'd found not just a job, but a purpose, not just shelter, but a home, and not just work, but love, the kind of love that didn't happen in fairy tales, the kind that was built slowly, painfully, through shared struggles and honest moments and choosing each other every single day. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And for Daisy Callahan, who'd spent her whole life accepting less than she deserved, real was more than enough. It was everything. Winter loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, like it resented having to give up the mountain. January bled into February, and the snow that had buried everything started to compact and settle. The days grew incrementally longer, the sun climbing a little higher each afternoon, though the cold remained bitter and unforgiving. Daisy moved her things into Wade's room on a gray morning in mid-February. It didn't take long, she didn't have much. A trunk of clothes, a few books, the quilt her mother had made years ago. Wade helped her carry everything up the stairs, and when they were done, he stood awkwardly in the doorway like he wasn't sure what to do next. "This is strange," he said finally. "What is?" "Having someone in my space. I've slept alone in this room for 15 years. Daisy looked around at the simple furniture, the bed that was barely big enough for two, the single window that faced the mountains. "We can get a bigger bed come spring, if you want. I want you here more than I want a bigger bed." Wade moved closer, took her hand. "But yeah, a bigger bed would be good." They settled into a new routine. Daisy still woke before dawn to start breakfast, but now Wade would wake with her, pull on his clothes in the dark, and help get the fire going. They'd work side by side in the kitchen in those quiet early hours, and sometimes Wade would come up behind her while she was kneading bread and wrap his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. The men noticed the change, but had the good sense not to comment much. Beckett would smile into his coffee. Jacob would duck his head and grin. Even Riley, who'd recovered fully from his appendicitis scare, kept his wisecracks to himself. Life on the ranch found a rhythm again, different from before, shaped by Caleb's absence and the new dynamics between Daisy and Wade, but steady. Then, in early March, everything changed again. It started with a knock on the door late one afternoon. Unusual, since visitors to the ranch were rare and unannounced ones even rarer. Wade answered to find a man standing on the porch, middle-aged, well-dressed despite the mud on his boots, with the kind of face that looked perpetually disappointed. "Can I help you?" Wade asked. "Are you Wade Granger?" "I am." "My name is Thomas Hewitt. I'm an attorney from Denver. I'm looking for a woman named Daisy Callahan. I was told she might be working here." Daisy, who'd been in the kitchen and heard voices, came to the door. When she saw Hewitt, her face went pale. "Daisy Callahan?" Hewitt asked. "Yes." "I need to speak with you. It's regarding your late aunt, Margaret Callahan of St. Louis." Daisy's hands went to her apron, twisting the fabric. "I don't have an aunt in St. Louis. My mother was an only child. Your father's sister, actually. She passed away 6 weeks ago. You're named in her will as the sole beneficiary." The words seemed to hang in the cold air. Wade moved to stand beside Daisy, his hand finding the small of her back. "I think you should come inside, Mr. Hewitt," Wade said. They sat in the main room, Daisy, Wade, and Hewitt, while the lawyer pulled papers from his satchel and explained the situation. Margaret Callahan had been a widow with no children. She'd owned a boarding house in St. Louis, some investments, and a small amount of savings. The total estate was valued at just over $8,000. A fortune, by any measure Daisy understood. "I don't understand," Daisy said, her voice small. "I never met this woman. Why would she leave me anything?" According to her letter, Hewitt pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age. She'd been looking for you for years. Your father was her brother. When he left your family, she tried to find him, to find you. By the time she did, your mother had passed, and you'd already left Silver Falls. She hired investigators, followed your trail as best she could. This ranch was the last place anyone had seen you. Daisy took the letter with shaking hands. The handwriting was spidery, old-fashioned. Dear Daisy, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry we never met. I'm sorry your father was the kind of man who walked away from his family. I'm sorry for so many things. I spent my life building something, a business, a home, security, but I had no one to leave it to. Until I found out about you. You're the only family I have left, the only piece of my brother that remains. I hope this money helps you build the kind of life you deserve. I hope it gives you choices. Whatever you choose, I hope you choose happiness. Your aunt, Margaret Daisy, read it twice, then a third time, her eyes burning. Wade's hand was warm on her back, steady. What do I need to do? She asked Hewitt. Sign some papers. The estate is already settled. Most of it's been converted to banknotes, easier to transport. You can collect it in Denver whenever you're ready, or I can arrange to have it transferred to a bank closer to here if you prefer. How long do I have to decide? No rush. The money's yours. Take whatever time you need. After Hewitt left, promising to return in a week for Daisy's decision, Wade and Daisy sat in silence. The enormity of what had just happened was still sinking in. $8,000, Daisy said finally. That's more money than I've ever seen in my life. It's enough to do anything you want, Wade said carefully. Go anywhere. Start over somewhere easier than this. Daisy looked at him sharply. Is that what you think I'll do? I don't know. It's what anyone sensible would do. Wade, I'm not trying to push you away, Daisy. I'm just saying you have choices now, real choices. You don't have to stay here out of necessity. You don't have to stay with me because you have nowhere else to go. Daisy stood abruptly, anger flashing through her. Is that what you think? That I'm only here because I'm desperate? No, but because if that's what you believe, then you haven't been paying attention. I chose to stay, Wade. I chose you. Not because I had no other options, but because this is where I want to be. Wade stood too, his face conflicted. That was before you had $8,000, before you had the freedom to go anywhere, do anything. The money doesn't change how I feel about you. Doesn't it? Daisy, be honest. If you'd had this money 4 months ago, would you have ever come here? Would you have ever taken this job? The question hung between them, brutal in its honesty. No, Daisy said quietly. Probably not. But I did come here. I did take this job, and everything that happened after, meeting you, building a life here. That's real. The money doesn't erase that. Wade ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I'm not explaining this right. I'm not trying to push you away. I'm trying to make sure you stay for the right reasons. I don't want you to wake up in 5 years, stuck on this mountain, resenting me because you gave up opportunities you can't even imagine right now. You think I haven't thought about that? You think I haven't questioned whether I'm making the right choice? Daisy's voice rose. I've spent my whole life being told I should be grateful for whatever scraps people throw me, that I should settle, should take what I can get, and not ask for more. And now I finally have something real, something I chose, and you're telling me I might be making a mistake? I'm telling you that you deserve to think about it, really think about it, not just react. I don't need to think about it. I know what I want. You've known about this money for an hour, Daisy. Give yourself time to process it. Daisy stared at him, hurt and angry and scared. Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to talk me out of staying? Wade's expression was anguished. Because I love you. And if you stay and regret it, if you end up hating me for keeping you here, I couldn't survive that. The fight went out of Daisy all at once. She sank back into her chair, suddenly exhausted. I'm not going to hate you, Wade. You don't know that. Yes, I do, because I know myself. And I know that this ranch, this life, it's not perfect. It's hard and isolated, and sometimes I wake up wondering if I'm crazy for choosing it. But it's mine. We're building something here together, and I don't want to give that up. Wade sat down across from her, his hands clasped between his knees. What if we compromise? What do you mean? Take some of that money and go to Denver or St. Louis or anywhere you want. Spend a few months seeing what else is out there. If you come back, I'll know it's because you really want to, not because you're afraid of change or because you don't think you have other options. Daisy felt something crack in her chest. You want me to leave? I want you to be sure. I am sure. Then prove it. Go. See the world. And if you still want this life, want me, come back. Daisy stood, tears streaming down her face now. You're asking me to leave so you can convince yourself I'll come back. But Wade, what if asking me to go is what destroys us? What if I leave and you decide it's easier not to fight for us? What if you use the distance as an excuse to push me away completely? Wade flinched like she'd hit him. I wouldn't. Yes, you would. Because that's what you do. You push people away before they can leave you. You did it with Beckett after your mother died. You're doing it now with me. And I get it. I do. You're scared. But I'm scared too, Wade. I'm terrified. And I need you to trust that I know my own mind. I need you to believe that I'm choosing you, not because I'm desperate or trapped, but because I love you. Wade's face was pale, his jaw tight. What if you're wrong? What if you stay and in 5 years you realize you gave up everything for a man who can't give you what you need? Then we'll deal with it in 5 years, together. But I'm not going to throw away what we have now because you're afraid of what might happen later. They stared at each other across the room, the space between them feeling vast. Finally, Wade spoke, his voice rough. I don't know how to do this, Daisy. I don't know how to accept that someone might actually choose me, might actually stay. Then learn. Figure it out. Because I'm here, Wade. I'm staying, and you can either accept that or spend the rest of your life waiting for me to leave. Wade closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet. I'm sorry. I'm handling this all wrong. Yes, you are. I don't want you to go. Then stop trying to convince me to leave. I need to know you're sure, that you've really thought about this. Daisy crossed to him, knelt in front of his chair, and took his hands. Listen to me. I am sure. More sure than I've ever been about anything. This money, it's a gift. It's security. It means I don't have to worry about what happens if the ranch fails or if you decide you don't want me anymore. It means I have choices. But Wade, having choices doesn't mean I'm going to choose differently. It means when I choose you, when I choose this life, you can believe it's real. Because I'm not here because I'm trapped. I'm here because I want to be. Wade pulled her up into his lap, wrapped his arms around her, and held on like she might disappear if he let go. I'm sorry, he whispered against her hair. I'm so sorry. You're right. I was trying to push you away because I'm scared. Because everyone I've ever loved has left, and I thought if I could control when you left, it would hurt less. It doesn't work that way. I'm starting to figure that out. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other while the afternoon light faded and the house settled around them. Finally, Daisy pulled back enough to look at his face. I do want to use some of the money, though. Wade's expression was cautious. For what? For us. For the ranch. I want to make this place better. Not just for you, but for everyone. A bigger kitchen with a proper stove. Better quarters for the men. Maybe even a small infirmary, so next time someone gets hurt or sick, we're not just hoping and praying. She paused. I want to invest in our future, together. Wade's face transformed. You'd do that? It's my money. I can do what I want with it, and what I want is to build something here that lasts. Daisy, is that okay? Or do you have a problem with your future wife investing in your ranch? Wade blinked. Future wife? You asked me to marry you, remember? Or was that just talk? No, I meant it, but I thought, you thought I'd change my mind because I have money now? Wade, the money doesn't change how I feel. It just means we can build something better than what we have. If you'll let me. Wade cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, deep and grateful and full of promise. When they pulled apart, he was smiling. You terrify me, he said. Good. Someone has to keep you on your toes. The weeks that followed were busy. Daisy met with Hewitt again, signed the papers, and arranged to have the money transferred to a bank in the nearest town. She kept some aside for immediate needs, but invested the rest carefully, following Beckett's surprisingly savvy financial advice. With Wade's cautious approval, she started making plans for improvements to the ranch. The kitchen would be first, a new stove ordered from Denver, shelving built properly, a larger space that could accommodate cooking for more people if they expanded. Then the bunkhouse, with better insulation and individual rooms instead of one large dormitory. The infirmary could wait until summer, but Daisy started stockpiling medical supplies, learning everything she could about basic treatment and emergency care. The men watched these changes with a mixture of awe and gratitude. They'd never had an owner, or an owner's partner, who thought about their comfort, their safety, their well-being beyond their ability to work. "You're changing this place," Beckett said to Daisy one afternoon while they were going over supply orders. "Is that bad?" "Hell no, it's about time. Wade's a good man, but he's been so focused on just surviving that he forgot about actually living. You're reminding him there's a difference." "I'm just trying to make things better." "You're doing more than that. You're building a community, a real one, where people take care of each other." Beckett paused. Caleb would have loved this, seeing Wade happy, seeing the ranch thrive. Daisy felt her throat tighten. "I wish I could have known him better." "He knew you well enough, saw what you were made of in those first weeks. He told me once, about a month before he died, that you were the best thing that ever happened to this ranch." Beckett smiled. "Guess he was right." In April, when the snow finally melted enough to reveal the ground beneath, Wade took Daisy up to Caleb's grave. They stood on the hillside, looking out over the valley that was just starting to green up, and Wade talked about his plans for the spring roundup, for expanding the herd, for the future. "Caleb always said this land could support twice as many cattle as I was running," Wade said. "But I was too cautious, too afraid of taking risks. And now? Now I have a partner who's braver than I am, who believes in things I'm too scared to hope for." He turned to face her. "I want to expand, Daisy. I want to build this ranch into something that lasts beyond us, something we can pass down." "Pass down to who?" Wade looked uncertain. "I don't know. Maybe—" He stopped, started again. "Do you want children?" The question caught Daisy off guard. She'd thought about it, of course, but in abstract terms. Children were something other people had, people whose lives were stable and certain. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe. Someday. Do you?" "I never let myself think about it before. Didn't seem fair to bring kids into a life this hard, this isolated." Wade took her hand. "But with you, yeah, I think I do. Not right away, but eventually." Daisy felt something warm bloom in her chest. "Then we'll figure it out together, like everything else." They stood on the hill a while longer, making plans and dreaming about futures that actually felt possible now. When they walked back down to the ranch, Daisy saw it differently than she had that first day. It wasn't just buildings anymore. It was home. The new stove arrived in May, delivered by a freight wagon that struggled up the mountain trail. It took 6 men to maneuver it into the kitchen, and when it was finally in place, Daisy stood and stared at it like it was a piece of art. "It's beautiful," she said. Riley laughed. "It's a stove. It's a beautiful stove, with even heat and a working oven, and enough burners that I can actually cook multiple things at once." "You're getting emotional about a stove," Riley said, but he was grinning. "Damn right I am. Do you know how many meals I burned on that old monster? How many times I had to rotate pans and guess at temperatures?" Jacob came up beside her. "Want to test it out?" "Immediately." That night, Daisy cooked the best meal the ranch had ever seen. Roasted chicken with herbs she'd been growing in a small indoor garden. Fresh bread with a crust that was actually crispy. Potatoes that were perfectly browned. Pie with a crust so flaky it melted in your mouth. The men ate like they'd been starving, praising every bite. Wade sat at the head of the table, watching Daisy with an expression that made her blush. Afterward, when the men had gone to the bunkhouse and Daisy was cleaning up, Wade came into the kitchen. "That was incredible, Tim," he said. "The stove helped." "It wasn't just the stove. You put love into that food. Everyone could taste it." Daisy set down the dish she'd been washing and turned to face him. "I've been thinking about what you said, about passing something down." "Yeah?" "I want to marry you, Wade. Not someday. Soon. Before summer, if possible. Wade's face lit up. Yeah? Yeah, I don't want to wait anymore. We've wasted enough time being scared. I want to start our life together. Officially. Wade crossed to her, pulled her close. June, then. We'll ride down to town, find someone to marry us, make it legal. That simple? That's simple. Daisy kissed him, and it felt like a promise, like the beginning of something bigger than both of them. They were married on a warm day in mid-June in the small church in town with Beckett and the ranch hands as witnesses. Daisy wore a simple dress she'd made herself, pale blue with white lace at the collar. Wade wore his best suit, cleaned and pressed, his hair actually combed for once. The ceremony was short, the words simple, but when Wade slipped a gold band onto Daisy's finger, a ring he'd bought with money he'd been saving for years, her eyes filled with tears. "I love you," Wade said, quiet enough that only she could hear. "I love you too." They kissed, and the small congregation cheered. Afterward, they had dinner at the town's only restaurant, and Beckett made a toast that was equal parts sentimental and sarcastic. The men presented them with a hand-carved headboard that Jacob and Esteban had made in secret, and Daisy cried again. That night, back at the ranch, lying in bed in their room with the new headboard and the moonlight streaming through the window, Wade pulled Daisy close. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For staying, for choosing this, for choosing me. Thank you for letting me." Wade kissed her forehead. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy." "You already do." "Then I'll spend it trying to keep you happy." Daisy smiled against his chest. "That sounds good." The summer was full and busy. The ranch expanded, taking on 2 new hands to manage the increased herd. The bunkhouse renovation was completed, and the men moved into individual rooms with actual doors and windows. Daisy's kitchen garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables that transformed their meals. In August, they broke ground on the infirmary, a small building near the main house, stocked with medicines and equipment Daisy had carefully researched and ordered. She learned from books and from a traveling doctor who came through and agreed to teach her basic skills in exchange for a week of her cooking. The ranch was thriving in ways it never had before, not just surviving, but actually succeeding. And through it all, Daisy and Wade grew together. They fought sometimes, about money, about plans, about Wade's tendency to work too hard and Daisy's refusal to slow down. But they also laughed. They also held each other through storms and celebrated small victories and built something neither of them had thought possible. In September, almost exactly a year after Daisy had first arrived, she stood in the kitchen one morning and realized she was late. Not just a day or two, enough to matter. She didn't tell Wade right away. She waited, watched, paid attention to her body. And when she was certain, when there was no doubt left, she waited for the right moment. It came on a Sunday evening. The men had the next day off and had gone to town for supplies, and knowing them, a few drinks. Wade and Daisy had the ranch to themselves for the night. They sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, wrapped in blankets against the September chill. "Wade," Daisy said quietly. "Remember when you asked me if I wanted children?" Wade turned to look at her, suddenly alert. "Yeah. I think we're going to find out." It took him a moment to understand. When he did, his eyes went wide. "I think so. I'm pretty sure." Wade's face went through about 6 different emotions in rapid succession: shock, fear, joy, panic, wonder. "When?" "Spring, probably. March or April, if I'm calculating right." Wade stood abruptly, then sat back down, then stood again. Do you need anything? Are you feeling okay? Should you be sitting out here in the cold?" Daisy laughed, caught his hand, pulled him back down beside her. "I'm fine. We're fine. It's early yet." "But Wade, are you happy?" Wade cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining in the fading light. "I'm terrified. Absolutely terrified. But yeah, I'm happy. Are you?" "Same. Terrified and happy." "We can do this, right? We can raise a kid up here? People have been raising kids in harder places since the beginning of time. We'll figure it out." Wade pulled her close, rested his hand on her stomach even though there was nothing to feel yet. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. We're going to have a baby. We are. They sat like that as night fell, making plans and dreaming about a future that was fuller and more complex and more beautiful than either of them had imagined. The winter that followed was easier than the one before. They were prepared now, knew what to expect. The new stove kept the kitchen warm, the bunkhouse kept the men comfortable, and the supplies Daisy had stockpiled meant no one went hungry. Daisy's pregnancy progressed normally, though the altitude made her tired and the cold made her ache. Wade hovered constantly, worried about everything, driving Daisy crazy with his concern until she finally told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "I'm pregnant, not dying, she said. "I can still work. I can still function. You need to calm down." Wade tried. He wasn't always successful. The men were excited about the baby, each in their own way. Beckett started carving a cradle from pine. Jacob offered to build toys. Even Riley, who'd never shown much interest in children, started acting protective of Daisy, helping her with heavy lifting and making sure she sat down when she looked tired. "You're all ridiculous," Daisy said one afternoon when 3 different men tried to carry something for her that she was perfectly capable of carrying herself. "We're protective," Beckett corrected. "There's a difference. You're smothering me. We'll stop when the baby comes." "You absolutely will not," Beckett grinned. "Probably not. No." In late March, when the snow was starting to melt and the first signs of spring were appearing, Daisy went into labor. It was early morning, before dawn, and the pain woke her from sleep. Wade woke to find her breathing hard, gripping the bed frame. "It's time," she said. Wade's face went white. "Now?" "Yes, now. Go get Beckett and bring water and towels," and another contraction hit, and Daisy had to stop talking. Wade ran. Within minutes, the house was in organized chaos. Beckett took charge of boiling water and gathering supplies. Jacob rode to town to fetch the midwife, though everyone knew he probably wouldn't make it back in time. The other men stayed in the bunkhouse, nervous and useless. And Wade stayed with Daisy, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement even though he looked like he might pass out. The labor was long and hard. Daisy had known it would be, first babies usually were, but knowing didn't make it easier. She screamed and cursed and at one point told Wade she was never doing this again. "Whatever you want," Wade said, looking terrified. "I mean it. This is the only one. We're done after this." "Absolutely. One and done." 12 hours later, when the sun was setting and Daisy was exhausted beyond measure, the baby finally came. A girl, small and red-faced and screaming loud enough to wake the dead. Beckett, who'd delivered calves and foals but never a human baby, handed the infant to Wade with shaking hands. "She's perfect," he said, his voice rough. Wade looked down at his daughter, and Daisy watched his face transform. All the fear and uncertainty and worry melted away, replaced by pure, uncomplicated love. "Hello," Wade said softly to the baby. "I'm your father." The baby stopped crying, opened her eyes, and looked at him like she was trying to figure out who he was. Wade carried her to Daisy, placed her in her mother's arms. "She's beautiful," he said, "like you." Daisy looked down at the tiny face, at the dark eyes and the small fists, and felt her heart crack open in a way she hadn't known was possible. This was her daughter, her child, part of her and part of Wade, and something entirely new. "What should we name her?" Wade asked. Daisy had been thinking about this for months, but suddenly all the names she'd considered seemed wrong. Then she remembered something Caleb had said, that last day before he died. "Hope," she said. "We'll call her Hope." Wade's eyes filled. "That's perfect." Hope Margaret Granger was baptized in the creek when the water warmed in June, with the whole ranch in attendance. Beckett stood as her godfather, promising to watch over her and protect her and teach her everything he knew about surviving on the mountain. The summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings and the particular exhaustion that came with caring for an infant. But it was also filled with moments of perfect joy. Hope's first smile, her first laugh, the way she'd grab Wade's finger and hold on like she'd never let go. Daisy learned to balance motherhood with running the ranch, learned to cook with a baby strapped to her chest, learned to function on 4 hours of sleep and still keep everyone fed. It wasn't easy. Some days she cried from exhaustion. Some days she wondered what she'd gotten herself into. But she never regretted it, not once. The ranch continued to grow. They took on more hands, expanded the herds, built new structures. Daisy's infirmary saw regular use, saving lives and preventing minor injuries from becoming major ones. The kitchen became the heart of the ranch, where everyone gathered not just to eat, but to talk and share stories and feel like they belonged to something. And through it all, Wade and Daisy grew into their roles, not just as partners running a ranch, but as parents, as leaders of a community, as people who'd found their place in the world. 2 years after Hope was born, despite Daisy's declaration in the delivery room that she was done, they had another child. A boy this time, who they named Caleb Wade Granger. Wade cried when Daisy told him the name she'd chosen, and he held his son like he was the most precious thing in the world. Riley, who'd become Hope's favorite among the hands, took one look at the new baby and said, "Well, I guess we're starting a whole ranch full of Grangers now." "Looks like it," Wade said, grinning. The children grew up surrounded by mountains and cowboys, and the particular kind of love that came from a community that chose to be family. Hope learned to ride before she could read, learned to cook at Daisy's side, learned strength from her mother and steadiness from her father. Caleb grew into a quiet boy who loved the horses and followed Beckett everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch. The years passed. The ranch prospered. Some of the original hands moved on, and new ones came. But the core remained, Beckett, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever. Jacob, who married a woman from town and brought her to live on the ranch. Esteban, who eventually became foreman when Beckett finally admitted he was getting too old for the job. And Wade and Daisy, who grew older together, who fought and laughed and built a life that neither of them could have imagined that first day when she'd stepped off the wagon. On a warm evening in late summer, 10 years after Daisy had first arrived, she stood on the porch with Wade, watching Hope and Caleb play in the yard. The ranch spread out around them, prosperous and alive, filled with people and purpose. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Staying, choosing this life instead of something easier." Daisy leaned against him, felt his arm come around her shoulders. "Not for a second. You?" "No. Best decision I ever made, giving you that job. Best decision I ever made taking it." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children and their ranch and their life unfold before them. And Daisy thought about how she'd come to this mountain with nothing but fear and desperation, how she'd been judged and dismissed and nearly broken, but she'd refused to quit. She'd pushed through the doubt and the pain and the endless hard work, and she'd built something beautiful. Not because she was perfect, not because it was easy, but because she'd been brave enough to try, brave enough to stay, brave enough to believe she deserved more than the scraps the world had offered her before. She'd arrived as an outsider, someone no one wanted or believed in. She'd left behind a woman who'd been beaten down by rejection and loss. And she'd become something else entirely. Not just a wife or a mother or a cook, but a force, a leader. The backbone of a community that thrived because she'd refused to let it fail. The mountain hadn't made her strong, she'd always been strong, but it had given her the space to prove it, to herself and to everyone else. "Mama," Hope called from the yard. "Come see what Caleb and I built." Daisy smiled, squeezed Wade's hand, and walked down to see what her children had created. And as she knelt in the dirt with her family around her and the mountains rising up against the sky, Daisy Callahan Granger knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because it was easy, not because it was what anyone expected, but because she'd chosen it. And that choice, that stubborn, brave, impossible choice, had made all the difference.